Good evening, everyone, and welcome into the City Central postgame here on STL Sports Central, brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook, where the crown is yours. What a game tonight in San Jose for St. Louis City SC. This team can still make a little bit of history as they have never in back-to-back weeks had to go on the road and pulled away wins in both of those games. That's the case now, as last week in Montreal and now this week in San Jose, City SC walking away both instances with 2-goal victories. This time it is a 3-1 win over the San Jose Earthquakes. Now I want to remind everyone, in addition to our good friends over at DraftKings Sports, we are also brought to you by our friends over at Home Bank out there at 3000 East Pittman Avenue in Lake St. Louis. Check them out because this City Central postgame is brought to you by our business banking partners at Home Bank. From the business lending to everyday banking, Home Bank has been with us since day one as a trusted partner. And watch out, coming up later on in the show, we'll be doing our Home Bank Money Moment of the game. We'll tell you more about Home Bank when you do that. It's going to be pretty easy to pick what the Home Bank money moment of the game is, but if you have any thoughts on that decision, get into the chat right now, as we always like you to do here on STL Sports Central, right there on the YouTube. While you're jumping into the chat, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell button so you know whenever we're going live on a night like this, when we have Cardinals, Mizzou, Illinois, St. Louis City, and of course the Blues started their postseason run tonight. So, you know, those games are going to be coming up here on STL Sports Central. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell button so you know whenever we go live across the St. Louis spectrum. Let's dive into that soccer game tonight, because as we talk about the money moment of the game, we all can probably guess that Brendan McSorley is going to be a big part of this topic here in the postgame, because of course he is. It was an incredible game. His first ever start, recently called up to the first team after another great year at City 2, and he puts in 2 goals and he gets an assist as well. An incredible game from Brendan McSorley. He was everywhere, and I know there were a lot of people who were questioning his start out of the gate about an hour before things got kicked off here in San Jose. And I understood the rationale. I wanted it as well. You have Makai Joyner, who is arguably the number one prospect. You look at his age, look at the numbers he's put up at City 2, one of the all-time greatest goal scorers in the short history of MLS Next Pro. And you expect Makai Joyner to get those kind of starts. But Brendan McSorley is a little bit older. He shows some maturity. He shows some intensity out on the field. And I think that's probably what won him this start, not only in his play last week coming off the bench in Montreal, but also in his training. We know David Critchley talks about how important training can be. And so he pulls the trigger on Brendan McSorley. And obviously, it was the correct trigger to pull, because Brendan McSorley had an insane night. Not just the 2 goals and the assist, but also the clearance off the goal line. It was an incredible game for Brendan McSorley, and everything we saw from him, you know, not just in his previous short time with St. Louis City SC, but also with City 2 this year, really came to fruition tonight. The biggest thing is, even though they're lining up in that very traditional 4-2-3-1, Brendan McSorley was starting at the right midi spot, and we talked about this, you know, over the last 7 months with this team, with Simon Bescher, and even early in the season, Cedric Toyshirt starting over there after Olaf left, and did that spot work. And Brendan McSorley is a guy who's a striker, much like Simon Bescher, much like Cedric Toyshirt, and he made that move out to right midi this season at City 2. And now he's playing it at City, and you see how well it can work, why that profile works for St. Louis City, why they tried it with Seti, why they tried it with Simon, and then why they're trying it now with Brendan McSorley. The difference is, why is it working? Just the hustle, the positioning, and the finishing. You know, Simon Bescher, if you look at his numbers, has gotten to good spots, you know, drifting in from that right midi spot. That's exactly what Brendan McSorley was doing all night tonight. That's why it was more of a 2-striker formation, and you saw Brendan McSorley and Klaus playing off each other in a lot of ways. The difference is, right at that first goal, the difference tonight is that Brendan McSorley buries that first goal. How many times this season has a City player had a chance right on the doorstep of the goal like Brendan McSorley? You need one touch on a fairly tricky ball like that volley, or that half volley if you want to call it, and McSorley buries this one. We can find a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half, 2 dozen instances with St. Louis City this year where that shot simply wasn't buried. And McSorley did that today. And that finishing is always going to be the biggest difference. Ryan Fraley jumps into the chat here. Love what you're doing here, Ryan. If you're watching, jump into the chat. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know if you have any questions about tonight. Let's look forward to 2026 with a young player like Brendan McSorley having a big game. Let's talk about that. Ryan Fraley, this match was so much fun. Guys in the Chat City Tactics Chat enjoyed it. Yes, a Discord that I need to jump into. Me and Chat City, we love talking to each other, but I've always left his Discord as kind of a separate place where people can get their thoughts going, because I love the way he talks. Me and him look at soccer in very similar ways, and that we buy into a lot of the analytics, a lot of the expected numbers and things like that. And I don't need to go on a numbers rant here, but the expected numbers to me are really interesting, because look at João Klaus. This is a guy that going into the Montreal match had 0 assists by FBref. I think he might have had 1, but according to MLS stats. But MLS stats are weird because they didn't give him an assist on the Volum goal. And while we're talking about this, I'll just bring up the little graphic I put together for everybody, which is a lot of people have been talking about the designated player production, the DP production. I know the team profiles, for the fall just hit yesterday. And I'll be going through those. I'll have a piece coming out here on STL Sports Central looking at every team's DP and U22 usage and comparing it to St. Louis City SC. But let's just look at the last 5 goals that they scored in these 2 games in Montreal and now in San Jose. So 5 goals, and look at the designated player production you've gotten from those 5 goals, or from those 5 goals in these last 2 games. Volum's goal in the 11th minute in Montreal. Klaus picks up the assist there. MLS didn't give it to him, but watch the replay and tell me I'm wrong for giving Klaus an assist on that one. That's a Klaus assist 9 times out of 10. I don't know how he has it. If I'm him, I have a written complaint to MLS saying, give me my goddamn assist, because I deserve that one. Hartle in the 55th minute, obviously you get the goal there, but a Klaus assist on that one as well. Tonight, McSorley in the 10th minute, that's a Klaus assist. Hartel in the 19th minute, that's a Hartel goal. And then McSorley in the 45th minute, that's a Hartel assist. So in the last 5 goals scored by St. Louis City, Klaus and Hartel have combined for 4 assists and 2 of those goals. You want a designated player production. You have handedly gotten designated player production. That was absolutely huge. I mean, every part about this game was good. Even the people who didn't put up a lot of big numbers, I thought had solid games. Edward Leuven continues to look more in shape and more comfortable every single week. Tonight he was working the defenders, and if the turf doesn't jump up and bite him in the ass and trip him a couple times, we probably have a couple big moments from Edward Leuven. Just all the big name players have been stepping up over the last couple weeks, and that's just something St. Louis City didn't have for the first 4 or 5 months of this season. I'm not saying it makes them a playoff team, but if Klaus, Hartel, and Leuven were able to do this across May, June, and July, then we're not looking at a scenario where every single team has to lose for them to get into the playoffs still. And yes, they technically are still alive. I can't believe I'm using the P word, but it's still here. We're still talking about it because teams still do keep losing. And are they going to keep losing? Probably not. But a game like today at least gives you some hope. And I know I already mentioned 2026, but when I look at what we just saw here, I mean, I expect João Klaus's option to be picked up, probably move his contract down to a TAM. I know he's got the little accent next to his name now, which says his contract isn't available to be bought down. Everything I know tells me that changes as soon as you pick up his option. So they will be able to buy him down in this winter. So he doesn't need to be a designated player, but Klaus should be on this team in 2026. Hartle, I know some people doubted his ability as a designated player. His production has finally been realized over the last 2 weeks, but it's been there the entire season. He's been incredible. He will be here next year. And then you look at a guy like Brendan McSorley. I know coming into this year, people didn't want to talk about a 3rd-round pick in the MLS Super Draft from a few years ago, who was already 23 years old and hadn't made his MLS debut yet. But when we had John Hackworth on Boots on the Ground right here on STL Sports Central, he talked about not underestimating the amount of potential that a guy like Brendan McSorley has. And I'll be honest, when he said that, part of me was like, okay, this might be a little bit of rose-colored glasses from a guy who's been a part of training this guy as a young player, as the technical director, who's been his head coach now for a couple of weeks at that time. Now it's been well over, or it was a couple of months at that point. Now it's been another month or so since we talked to John Hackworth. But he talked about how just because he's 23 years old, just because he's a super draft pick, just because he's not this insane athlete at a young age, doesn't mean he doesn't have talent and potential. And I was impressed with what he did against Aston Villa. And John Hackworth called him I think he said he was the 2nd best player out on the field that day against an EPL team that was, yes, playing a lot of backups in a friendly game, but nonetheless, I mean, Brendan McSorley's shown it. I mean, he's not the fastest guy out there, but he gets in position. He's an efficient player. His passing was crucial tonight, and the fact that he's doing it from this kind of hybridized right midi striker position that he's had to kind of learn on the fly at City 2 this year as he slowly locks his game in, becomes more of a passer, more of a wing player, while also having those moments where he drifts inside as a classical striker. That's not an easy positioning job. We saw Cedric Toyshirt, a veteran, kind of struggle with that at times this year. We saw Simon Bescher get some numbers and good positioning numbers out of it, but Simon Bescher has had trouble finishing the entire season. And look what Brendan McSorley did. I know we already talked about that, but I mean, this is the kind of thing that you see, and it gives you a little hope. Again, it's going to suck when they get eliminated from the playoffs in 24 hours or the next week, but it's hard not to look at a player like Brendan McSorley and all these designated players and these guys who are going to be here in 2026 and say, all right, at least there's something to build off. Roman Berkey has another huge game. If they get him re-signed, which wouldn't surprise me at all. I know a lot of people think that there's a very small chance of it. I still think it's a pretty good chance that Roman Berkey is here next year. He had his best game of the entire season. And as we're going to get to Eggplant Emoji's question here, he's got, how soon before ownership began searching for a new sporting director? I mean, I truly believe that search began. Sorry, I'm looking for my beverage because I'm parched. I truly believe that search began right when they fired Lutz, if not before it. Because there's so many decisions that have to be made this offseason. They have to get a new sporting director who then has to probably bring his input into a coaching search that has already been outlined by Diego Gigliani, John Hackworth, and ownership. So then he has to come in. He has to give his input. That changes and affects the coaching search and things like that. And at that point, you then are staring down a roster that has just so many damn options and so many potential changes. And you don't have a very long offseason. So they got to get searching already. They already are searching. Teams around MLS are making moves. DC United just hired their sporting director, who was an agent before he stepped in as a sporting director, which a lot of people are asking questions about. And I think that's completely fair on a lot of people's count because that seems like a sketchy move. I hope that's not the way that St. Louis City goes in their sporting director search. But that's up in the air. It's hard to really have any thoughts about that because we really don't know what the moment's going to be. We really don't know, what the biggest things he's going to be searching for are going to be. Is sporting director mindset really does have an impact on the roster. Look at the roster we're looking at now. Over the last 2 weeks, I've had a ton of conversations with people about designated players. I truly believe that the whole "we want to be a designated team" comments from Lutz Pfannenstiel had real impact in how they viewed the team building over the last 3 seasons. I think there's a good chance there's change in that mindset, and that mindset was sporting director based and not ownership based. To that point, do I think that this is the kind of team that's going to spend the $11 to $14 million that you need to get the biggest star attacking players? Because this is why I'm going, by the way, I mentioned earlier, this is why I'm doing the piece where I'm going team by team and looking at their designated player and U22s, because when you get the full scope of what the entire league is doing, you can see where things kind of stratify into tiers. St. Louis City SC is not going to play in the tier of these $11 million, $14 million transfer fees that also have a salary of $3 million. That's not going to happen. But under a different sporting director, I think it's completely feasible to expect $6 million transfer fees for big name players. $8 million, maybe. I think when we to get up to like $8 or $10 million, City SC is going to have to start bringing in some transfer fees for young players and things like that. I know over the last 6 months they've recouped money on a number of sell-on fee percentages, but that's those are nice dollars to get, but we're not getting real money here, and the only real money they've really gotten from anybody is $2 million for Nico Gioacchini. So to really start getting more to those $8 or $10 million price tags, I think we do need to see some sales or just to get further into year 7 or 8. But I do think that this offseason, having an expectation for them to spend 10 or $11 million across a couple players, with maybe a big name player being a $6 million buy or a $7 million buy, I think that's reasonable. I think it's reasonable to expect that boost with a different sporting director. I think it's reasonable to expect that boost with an ownership group that knows they got to start winning. And also, when you see that them spending just under or just over $5 million, just under $6 million this past summer, I think it's reasonable to expect to go from about $6 million to about $10 million in spending, maybe bump it up to 11 or 12 if you think the impetus of needing to win is going to push this group. But I do think there will be more money spent than we have seen in the past, all partially because of the change in sporting director, but partially because my entire theory has been the first 3 to 5 years was going to be a lot of, we just spent $750 million. We'll get to it eventually, but the young players are coming, and augmenting them is going to be important, and we don't want to wait until the 2010s hit, because I know the 2010 youth group is an incredible group of players, but no one's trying to wait another 6 years for St. Louis City to have ammo. They need to start spending some money. I think it's fair. Colin comes here on the chat, and if you're watching right now, you have any questions about 2026, this offseason, the roster profiles, designated players, U22s, whatever you want to jump in on St. Louis City SC, we will cover it here in the YouTube chat. Colin, how far do we push for Vollum and Padelford? Right back and left back have been such problem positions. Yeah, no doubt about that. I've been pushing at a left back for a couple $1 million since June. Padelford's an interesting case because everything I've been told, everything I've seen, everything that's been reported, there is no option to buy on Padelford. It seems like an odd move, but I'm blanking on the name right now. But there's a team that traded a first-round pick for like a 6-month loan of a designated player earlier this year. I'm blanking on who did that, but so them spending a 3rd-round pick to get him is still a weird move in my mind. But if you just look at it as, okay, we don't have the sell-on clause with him, but we just get 5 months of a player in the building. We know what his attitude is. We know what his workout scheme is, his work ethic and those kind of things. And we know he plays on the field in a much more intimate way than if we're just collecting data and sending scouts to look at him. So you pay a 3rd-round pick to get a really good look at a player who, in your mind, Minnesota still isn't going to really have as a fit. Anthony Marcanic, by the way, former St. Louis City player who's playing that left wing back spot, which Padelford would naturally slide into up in Minnesota in that new scheme. Anthony Marcanic just got a contract extension. So the long game is that I don't know if Minnesota United's going to want Devin Padelford. So you pay the 3rd-round draft pick, you get the most intimate look you possibly can at a player, and then you say, all right, Minnesota, you don't need him. What do you want for him? Now, of course, you lose a little leverage in that discussion because now Minnesota knows, well, they want him. So what are we going to get for him? So that's why you have the sell-on clauses, is so that if you really like a player, the team can't, jack up his price tag after he has a lot of success with you. That's one of the benefits of it. It protects you, but it also makes sure the other team gets some money. So now you don't have the leverage there. Now they know you want him. Do they jack up the price to something St. Louis City doesn't want to pay? I don't know if Minnesota United doesn't just say, this is an asset we don't want. We'll get what we can, and he's out the door. So I think there are a lot of windows for Devin Padelford to return and to really rationalize that 3rd-round draft pick they traded for him. Vollum, on the other hand, this entire year I've been big on I just think his purchase price is going to be too much. But, I think it's around $3 to $3.5 million. $6 million was too big. I was overshooting that, and I've been able to ask some questions, and I think it's more like $3 to $3.5 million for Conrad Vollum's future fee. That seems like a pretty good price for Conrad Vollum for me. Depending on his contract and the length, that puts him at that might put him at a DP level, which I think is probably too much. That's the issue with him. Based off what I've seen, are there any TAM level contracts with a $3 million transfer fee? I think I could probably find a couple 4-year deals with a smaller contract spread out. There might be a couple. I might be doing the math in my head wrong. Maybe you can't get a TAM deal with that big of a transfer fee, unless it's just. I mean, unless you're paying them like, I don't know if the math works out. So is and Vollum in my mind, if you get him on a DP deal because he's obviously too old for U22. I don't have the math in front of me right now, and I'm using my iPad to do this, and I could do some of the math on my phone. But just off the top of my head, I feel like it'd be tricky to get him under DP with a $3.5 million transfer fee. So based off that, do you want Conrad Vollum to be a designated player? He's a solid player. He's really good. His versatility at Matt Z says, I believe it would be a TAM. Yeah, is there like a TAM calculator or anything like that? MLS contract calculator. Let's see if we can find something on here on the fly. Because it all gets into the average year. You combine the transfer fee and the salary. You average it out over the year. If it's under a certain amount of number, it can be a TAM. If it's over a certain number, it has to be a designated player. 740,000 minimum. Yeah, but then you have to factor in the transfer fee. And if that takes him over the average, and that's the only thing is because a guy like João Klaus, who was what, a $3 million. I mean, João Klaus was a $3 million transfer fee, but he's also getting he's also getting blanking on the number that Klaus is getting for salary. He's getting 1.2 million. So that's the thing is that if you're paying Vollum, $500,000 less per year, and it's a 4-year contract. Does that make him? Does that put him at TAM level? Because a 3-year contract at $3 million and $1.3 million with Klaus put him too high. You couldn't buy Klaus down until the end of this winter. So you're correct in that. I think you're right that it could happen, but you'd have to get Vollum at a fairly, not a low, but for the level of deep TAM, you'd have to get him at a pretty low contract. If it is $3.5 million for the future fee, and I'm theorizing based off some people I've talked to that it is a $3.5 million future fee for Conrad Vollum. So if you can get him at a TAM, fine. Because let's zoom out here because of the positional thing is what I was going to get to. Is Conrad Vollum a right back in your 4-2-3-1 or just whatever your 4-back system is? Because that's what this team purports to be, is a 4-back system. I don't think that's going to change. Is he a right back going forward? I didn't think he was. He didn't think he was. Apparently, he was brought in to be a 6 or an 8. With the way that he shows that he can obviously have the defensive responsibilities of a back 4 player. That tells me that he could have the defensive responsibilities of a 6 next to Edward Leuven. We know that he obviously can cover box to box, which is an important thing of being a 6 on this team. When you talk about him as a right back, I love the way that he is able to shift inside. That's a big thing. Going back to Pep Guardiola at Bayern Munich 10 years ago, but it's been something that we've seen more and more teams pick up across world football, which is you invert your fullbacks to give you an extra body inside of the midfield. And you saw just how it works with Conrad Vollum making that underlapping run to get that goal early in that Montreal game. Getting extra bodies in the midfield is, I don't think it's the best. I'm not going to say I'm biased and say it's the best strategy in soccer, but it's one of those like axiomatic things in the sport that makes sense. And so having a Conrad Vollum, at the 6 naturally, where he's already in the center of the pitch making those plays, that could be beneficial. But is he a 6 when pairing with a guy like Edward Leuven, who needs somebody to have some defensive fortitude and range? That's the more important thing, I think, with a guy like Edward Leuven. I just need somebody who has range, because Edward Leuven isn't going to, run a lot, from the back line a lot. You saw it tonight. He drops back and he gets that extra pass from the back line, and he plays from that deep lying playmaker position. So having a guy like Conrad Vollum as the 6 next to him, who's just running box to box, covering a lot of ground, you have the similar risk of that Chris Durkin presents of, he gets a little high on the pitch a little bit and involved in the offense a little bit too much. But, I mean, if Conrad Vollum's doing that instead of Chris Durkin, I think you're going to come out better more often than you are now. Matt Z says, wouldn't we have some TAM bucks via trades? Yeah, I mean, again, the issue isn't how much TAM necessarily you have. It's about you can't buy down a certain player if the number is above a certain threshold. And that's why Klaus has been a DP all 3 of these years. Because production-wise, last year, if based on what he was giving you, if he could have bought down Klaus, I feel like they would have bought down Klaus this winter. But they couldn't because transfer fee plus contract. But to your point, though, if you can pay Conrad Vollum a lot less, you might be able to get him on the TAM level. But the $3.5 million makes it tricky. And also at the same time, let's theorize. You have, let's call it 11. You have $11 million to spend this winter. Do you want to spend $3.5 million of it on a hybrid 6 fullback? That's another question you have to ask yourself. I know there's a lot of people who are usually in this chat whose big thing is, I want a scorer. I want a dynamic scorer. And when you see guys finish at a dynamic level like Brendan McSorley did tonight and Marcel Hartl did, I'm not expecting those guys to do it every week. If you have a guy like Denny Bouanga or Evander, you could expect them to do it every week. The problem is, again, those guys cost a lot of money, or those guys are going to cost $8 million of that $11 million price tag. So if you want one of those guys, you don't also get Conrad Vollum this winter, because I think expecting anything more than $11 or $12 million isn't fair, and you're just going to disappoint yourself. So do you want Conrad Vollum for $3.5 million if that means that your next move is probably going to be $6 million, and then your third move is going to be maybe another $3 million player? That, I think, makes sense for me, because I think St. Louis City needs to build a stronger 11 overall. Getting one way better player, I don't know how much it helps this team in the long run, because things like finishing are, even with the best players, things like finishing aren't always consistent. So adding another attacker, I think is necessary. But at the same time, and I've been saying this for the last few months, you also have to throw in that who are the most successful players right now for the youth side from St. Louis City SC? Well, Mekhi Joyner and Brendan McSorley are both attackers who are actually making an impact right now. And so right out of the gate, one of the few places where you want to give guys minutes and want to give guys chances is your attacking spot. So then you turn around and say, that's where we want to spend $6 or $7 million? Or do you say, we got Tyson Pierce, but other than that, we don't really have any other big name defenders right now. We just spent big on a fullback or on a center back in Falou Fall. Do we go spend $3 or $4 million on a left back? Do we spend the $3 million down on a Conrad Vollum and call him a right back? This system needs a better 6. Bottom line, I love Chris Durkin. He had a huge game tonight with 2 assists. He can be a really good player. In the moments that we've seen Chris Durkin have great, his best moments, he's the 6 that St. Louis City needs. But his contract's about to get a huge boost because he comes off the U22 initiative, because this is 25-year season. I don't think they're going to pick up Chris Durkin's option. Puts a pretty big hole at the 6th spot next to Edward Leuven. That's where I think they need to spend the most money. Football games are won in the center of the pitch, and the control of games is won in the midfield third. And getting another player with a more defensive mindset to pair with 2 of the better midfielders in MLS that you already have on your roster in Marcel Hartl and Edward Leuven, that I think takes City. Maybe it doesn't take their ceiling to the level that people want it to be with a higher attacker, but it raises their floor to a playoff team, in my opinion. A healthy St. Louis City with another midfielder at the level of Leuven or Hartl, with a defensive mindset, a controlling mindset as a 6 there in the middle of that 4-2-3-1, that I think is the biggest thing that St. Louis City has needed this entire season from the get-go. I think getting solid play from Jabulo Blom was huge in that first season, and it wasn't going to last, and they had to make a pivot, and they did that with the Chris Durkin trade, and it's worked in moments, but it hasn't worked enough. That's got to be the biggest spot. I know people are going to disagree with me here, but if they spent even across the board on a left back, a right back, and a 6, I'd be happy. The one thing we haven't mentioned tonight when we're talking about new players and talking about the fullback positions, Thomas Totland is under contract going into next year. What does the new coach think of him? What does the new sporting director think of him? Where's his confidence at after the back half of this season? Those are all things we have no idea right now when it comes to that right back spot. So they might think we don't need to spend any money at the right back spot. We have our starter in Thomas Totland. I'm not sure, but I'm very confident that, and heck, we already talked about Devin Padelford. I don't need to run that down again, but they might think we have our starter at left back in Devin Padelford. So I might be thinking they need a left back, a right back, a 6, and an attacker. They might be thinking we need a 6, an attacker, and we need to solidify the spots we know right now at left back and right back. That's not how I would see it. This team needs more depth on the flanks. They found it on the offensive flanks. They need it on the defensive flanks. No doubt. Yaziel Orozco, a great depth player, a guy you want as your fifth fullback or fourth or fifth center back and your fourth fullback. That you want him as a guy you move around as a chess piece late in games when somebody gets hurt, because he's going to give you a crazy amount of energy and effort, and he can give you similar play at multiple spots. But you need to improve the defensive flanks, full stop. And that's why I'm going to bring up maybe the only negative of today's game. But before we actually get into the only negative, we talk about him a lot. I do want to mention our good friends over at Home Bank. Our money moment of the game brought to you by Home Bank. Money moment of the game is going to be right out of the gate early in this one, and that is the 10th minute of the game when Brendan McSorley bangs home his first ever MLS goal in his first ever MLS start. That is, of course, brought to you by our friends at Home Bank. Business isn't just about numbers, it's about relationships. And with Home Bank, those relationships make all the difference. Home Bank is the team behind our team at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank or call 855-577-2001. Home Bank, member FDIC, more than a bank. They're your business partner. Again, that's our money moment of the game, brought to you by Home Bank, the team behind our team at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank or right there on your screen. Give them a call at 855-577-2001. We'll be closing down this City Central post game here in just a few minutes, but I did want to mention again the one negative of this game, because Brendan McSorley had a huge game. The designated players are coming to play for St. Louis City SC, but we do have to talk about the defense, because Roman Berkey had an insane night tonight, because he had to have an insane night tonight. You just cannot be allowing a team like the San Jose Earthquake to put up almost 4 expected goals against St. Louis City SC. We've talked a lot about the XG battles. St. Louis City has won a lot of XG battles while losing the game. Tonight's another instance where they win the game despite losing the XG battle. Some of you out there will say, well, then, XG doesn't matter. Why do we keep talking about it? That's fair. You might have me on that one. I'm gonna use it this time to talk about how St. Louis City's defense still needs more depth. And tonight was proof purchase, because you had Conrad Vollum and Devin Padelford at the fullback spots, but you didn't have your center back depth. Falou Fall was out and Henry Kessler were both out, and the team obviously felt that. And I know you're not going to have a lot of games next year, hopefully, that both Kessler and Falou Fall miss it, but it proves just everything that I've been saying for the last 10 or so minutes. You need to improve the 6th spot, because if you're not going to have center backs, you need to have somebody supporting them in the midfield, because this scheme stretches you out constantly. This team gets stretched out too far, and they have to recover. Having a good defensive 6 who sits in the right spot and covers the ground he's supposed to helps you in those situations. So fix the 6. Get more depth, and maybe you don't have games where the San Jose Earthquakes are almost ripping you apart for 4 XG, because you're losing that game more often than not. You're certainly not going to win very many games where you produce 1.7 and the other team produces over 4. You're not going to win those games a lot. You're certainly not going to win them 3-1. That goes back to Montreal last week. They won that game without taking a single corner. I know they got kind of screwed, and there should have been at least one corner. But the bottom line is City's winning games in ways they aren't early in the year, not because they're playing that much better, but because they're finishing. And so I think we just need to take a little perspective and say, across the 150 moments that every player has in a game, is St. Louis City playing that much better right now than they were in June or July or August? Yes, they're playing better than they were, I think, in April and early May. I think that's crucial. But I do think some of these numbers that we've seen from some of these games, and let's go back to the last home game when they put in all those crosses and nothing came of it. I just have some questions. And maybe you're saying, listen, no fall, no Kessler, throw the whole XG allowed by the defense out. You're not going to see many games. That's fair, but to me, it proves this team needs more depth. And so a $9 million right wing is not going to solve what I think is actually maybe the largest underlying issue for St. Louis City SC. Before we close out the show, I want to tell everybody about our good friends at DraftKings Sportsbook, where the crown is yours, because it keeps getting closer. December 1st is creeping closer. Missouri, you got to get ready. The wait is almost over. DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is coming soon to the Show Me State, and you can sign up today. New Missouri customers can get $300 in bonus bets when DraftKings launches on December 1st. Download now and place a $5 bet when they go live. DraftKings Sportsbook brings you everything you need to elevate your game day, including live in-game betting, lightning-fast payouts, and endless ways to get in on the action, all right from your phone. And when you officially go live in Missouri, you'll be betting with the sportsbook app trusted by millions, safe, secure, and has fast money withdrawals. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code STL Sports right there on your screen to grab those $300 in bonus bets, just a $5 bet when we go live on December 1st. That's code STL Sports in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus, physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Exclude customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. St. Louis City SC with a huge 3-1 win over the San Jose Earthquakes. Again, early in 2023, they got a couple away game wins in a row, and obviously that record-breaking start to their 2023 campaign. But all those away wins came with home wins in between them. St. Louis City SC in their history has never had 2 away games back-to-back and won both of those games. That changed in these last 2 weeks with Montreal and San Jose. So maybe throw all the XG and all the other crap out of there. They did something they've never done in the history of this franchise under David Critchley. Do you take that to the bank for 2026? I'm not sure. They got to find a new SD. They got to make a decision on a head coach. Do wins like this give David Critchley a chance for 2026? I think that might be one of the biggest questions. If he keeps winning and if everyone else keeps losing, the question stays alive even longer, because St. Louis City, as I talk right now, based off the scores I've seen, is not yet dead when it comes to the MLS playoffs. David Critchley gets another win. St. Louis City is going to have a huge game hosting LAFC next weekend. Can they get another victory? Will they still be alive? We'll talk about that next time we convene here on the City Central Postgame. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to everybody for joining us in the chat. Make sure, again, you like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell button to that STL Sports Central YouTube page. Doing those things like sharing it and subscribing, that's why we're here. Also, another reason you can help us stay here, support those sponsors. Download that DraftKings Sportsbook app. Make sure you're ready for that launch on December 1st. And check out our friends over at Home Bank, bringing us our money moment of the game. Of course, huge moments from Brendan McSorley, scoring early and often for St. Louis City in his first ever start. Thank you so much to everyone for joining the show today. This has been STL Sports Central. This has been the City Central Postgame. I'm Matthew Rocchio, signing off for STL Sports Central and the Postgame. We'll talk to you later, St. Louis.